What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back in the video. On Wednesday, we talked about the year 2 wide receivers I'm drafting right now, doing the opposite. Today, we're going to the ones I've been avoiding so far this offseason. We'll start things off with Jackson Smith and Jigba. JSN was taken 20th overall last season in the NFL draft, of course, later in fantasy. Had a fine rookie season, 63 receptions, 628 yards, so just under 10 yards per reception, and 4 touchdowns. The issue with JSN this season is the same thing it was last year. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Now, there's certainly some appeal here, right? He's the wide receiver 43 off boards right now, and so he doesn't need a ton of improvement from last season. He was 59th in points per game, so he's obviously going to need to do more than he did last year to pay off that ADP. A decent chunk more to go past it, but wide receiver 43 isn't some, insane mark for him to pass. Also, the new coaching staff is definitely a positive since, he was cast into basically like a slot only role last season. Obviously, that hurts when you have a player that, has the ceiling he has in terms of what he can be as a player put into slot only. That just kind of limits what he can do. Especially when, he can win as a flanker, right? It's not like he actually is a slot only wide receiver, but you looked at the team and you're like, well, he's not an X, and obviously Metcalf's the X. So it's like he's going there. And Lockett's really good still. Obviously, getting up there in age, but is still a very good wide receiver. And so they kind of threw him into the slot and we're like, that's basically your role this season. It is worth noting that we knew his upside last season would have to come through an injury to Metcalf and Lockett. Like, if Metcalf and Lockett were to stay healthy through the entire season, that JSN can only do so well. And that's what happened, right? He only did so well. He did basically as much as he could, but when you're the third option on a mediocre offense, like a league average offense, you can only be so good. So maybe the new coaching staff will rotate him out or in, I guess, a little bit more, take Lockett out a little bit more, kind of rotate 2 wide receiver sets a little bit more often. Maybe he takes a step forward in his route running, maybe moving closer, because like right now he's like an above average route runner, maybe moves closer to like the low end of elite status and they kind of have to get him on the field. Maybe we see an injury to Metcalf or Lockett. That would just help his target share increase. So there are possibilities here to where if he finished as the wide receiver 30, I wouldn't be like, oh, how did that happen, right? There's a lot of things that could occur. I just really draft him because there are a number of other players going even later than him at the same position who are just in much better situations and don't need an injury, don't need a complete shift in, offensive scheme to where they can outperform their ADP. Like Quentin Johnston goes later. He's going to be a target hog for the Panthers. He could approach, low 20s, mid 20s for target share this season. DeAndre Hopkins is in Tennessee, but he's still probably the 1A this season. Christian Watson could be the number 2 on a better offense. Same thing for Jameson Williams. Same thing for Curtis Samuel. Cortland Sutton is likely the wide receiver 1 in Denver. And so you start looking at all of the players who are sometimes going, 2 rounds later, and it's a bunch of wide receiver 2s on better offenses or wide receiver 1s, whereas JSN is either like the 3 or the 2B on what is a fairly average offense. So again, I'm not actively avoiding JSN. It's not just like, oh, he's top player in the rankings, I just can't go there. If he becomes a top player in the rankings and I need a wide receiver, I'm perfectly comfortable drafting him because he's a good player. That doesn't typically happen because of where I have him. He's not a player I'm seeking out in any way. So most of the time, I do not end up with him. I would rather draft a player who I feel almost identical to 2 rounds later. Another year 2 wide receiver I've been passing on is Jordan Addison. Addison is going 38th right now, wide receiver 38, obviously, in drafts. That's like the mid-6 on Underdog. Redraft, that's probably around round 8. Depends if it's a 3 wide receiver league. If it's 3 wide receiver, you're probably looking still at the mid-6th. Now, Addison was actually 28th in half PPR points per game last season. So his ADP on the surface actually is of value. The problem is there's been a pretty big shift in situation. He's also likely going to see a decent amount of regression from 10 touchdowns on 70 receptions. That's a very, very high rate, especially when you're playing with someone like Justin Jefferson, right? But Addison played, 3 games with Cousins active and Jefferson out last season. That's like the dream scenario had going into the year. For Addison, averages 5.7 receptions for 78 yards, scores 4 touchdowns in those 3 games. So he shows that ceiling, right? But then he also played 9 games with Cousins out and Jefferson active, which is much more similar to the situation we're going to see this season. Averages 3.8 receptions, 47 yards, only 3 touchdowns in those 9 games. I hyped Addison a lot last offseason because I really like the Vikings. I just thought if you were just to invest in the Vikings offense, that would be great. And it was true until, of course, we have the Kirk Cousins injury. Still true for Jefferson. Obviously, like Jefferson doesn't matter in the quarterback. He's going to be awesome. But obviously, once they lost Cousins, that was tough. But the offense was great before that. Definitely, Addison obviously would have performed better throughout last season had Cousins been the quarterback all year. But realistically, right, we need to, understand his limitations as a player, limitations in this offense, and understand the difference going from Kirk Cousins down to McCarthy. Like, Addison is a great wide receiver too. But when Jefferson is healthy, the target share, the target ceiling for Addison is limited. It just simply is. Like, Jefferson is going to be the player they are scheming touches to. When Hawkinson returns, he's going to be a target hog. And, for as good as Addison was in the 3 games with Cousins and no Jefferson, he wasn't that great in the 4 games that Cousins and Jefferson missed. So if you're thinking, he still has that ceiling if Jefferson were to miss time, we only saw that when Cousins was the quarterback. When they had the other quarterbacks and Jefferson missed games, he scored in half PPR 7.7, 8.9, 5.9, 6.9. So he wasn't that amazing. And again, McCarthy is going to be much closer to the backups they had last season than he will Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins is still a really good quarterback, especially for the players on his team in fantasy, which is all we care about, right? We don't care about sometimes the mistakes that he makes. All we care about is how productive are the players in fantasy that he is throwing to, and the answer there is highly productive. And so maybe, McCarthy, takes this huge step forward. Maybe he, exceeds expectations as a rookie. He has like a CJ Stroud-like season. Maybe. Then maybe we can squeeze some value out of Addison. I just think, people are overrating the actual ceiling that Jordan Addison has. Like, he only went over 64 yards twice with Jefferson active, and he never hit double-digit targets. So with a rookie quarterback playing behind the best wide receiver in football, I just don't see any sort of like real target ceiling. And I do see some risk that, McCarthy just takes a little bit of time to develop. I'm not saying McCarthy's a bad quarterback or bad prospect, but, especially for like the first half of the season, first like 3/4 of the season, it might be a little bit rough for Addison, just leading to fewer overall opportunities because they're obviously not going to let McCarthy drop back as often as they did Kirk Cousins. And so a little bit of risk there. I just feel a lot better about some of the wide receivers going in that range than I do Addison. I like the ceiling more, and it's fine if a player doesn't have a ceiling in that range. It's less fine if I think the floor could really bottom out, and I think that could be the case for Addison this season. Third, year 2 wide receiver I'd be avoiding right now is Rashee Rice. I think most people can kind of get on board with this one just until we know more about the suspension. His ADP has definitely fallen. Like, it was egregious to start. I've been staying behind ADP in the rankings. It is getting to the point where it's like, okay, now it's starting to be okay. Right now, wide receiver 44, I'm still not going there. If he breaks out of like that top 50, right, he gets into like, the wide receiver 55, now we can start talking. I just think there's a pretty strong chance he's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks. I think 6 to 8 is probably what we should expect for a suspension. And that's a really big hit to your team if that happens, because in the vast majority of leagues, you can't put a suspended player in IR. If you are in a league where a suspended player is allowed to be in the IR spot, it hurts you a little bit less, especially because early in the season, it's just less likely you're going to have a player that is out for multiple weeks that can go into your IR spot. Like, it's just more likely your team is fully healthy. So that's a positive there. But I would say like 90% of leagues, you can't put a suspended player in the IR spot, and you shouldn't be able to if you are a commissioner. And that really hurts having a player in like that mid to late round, not really a late round pick yet, but that like kind of mid round range, just instantly ride your bench for half of the season. If they have a bye, we haven't seen the schedule yet. You guys may have seen the schedule when this video comes out, but I've not seen it yet. But let's just say KC has a bye in the first 8 weeks, and then he gets an 8-week suspension. Like, we're looking at 9 weeks before we can actually use Rashee Rice. And if he's riding your bench that whole time, especially if you only have 5 or 6 bench spots, that is really going to hurt you. But it's not only that. Let's say you're allowed to put him in IR. Let's say it's a 6-game suspension and their bye comes later in the season. Like, let's just say that's probably the best outcome you can imagine, right? They still added decent target competition this offseason. Like, Marquise Brown's been overrated for most of his career, but, KC is going to find very good ways to use him deep downfield. They drafted Worthy in the first round. I know he's kind of a polarizing prospect, but I trust Andy Reid. I trust, this Chiefs coaching staff. I trust Patrick Mahomes to utilize at least one of them correctly and have one of them really work out in this offense. But there's risk that both of those two really work out, and that, Rice kind of ends up as like the 4th or 5th option. If you want to throw Pacheco in there, he could be the 5th option. Like, we could see, Kelsey be their effective wide receiver 1. We could see both Worthy and Marquise Brown be more valuable than Rice, and then also see Pacheco just get more touches, obviously, than he would get. And so he'd be the 5th most valuable player. That is a possibility even when he returns. Like, I know he was great in the second half of last season, but that was mostly based off of extreme volume. He had at least 8 targets in 8 of the last 9 weeks, including the playoffs, which is obviously going to lead to some really good games when Mahomes is your quarterback. But like, think about their wide receiver room last season. Like, throw out Kelsey. He doesn't count as the wide receiver room, but like, you have Kelsey there. You have Rice, Justin Watson, MVS, Tony, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman. Like, that is a train wreck of a wide receiver room. So not exactly shocking that Rice got up to 102 targets. When you add in Marquise Brown and Worthy, we could see a big drop off there. Like, you're upgrading Justin Watson and MVS into Marquise Brown and Worthy. Again, not a guarantee those two are going to work out, but they're better than Justin Watson and MVS. So my worry is you're going to have a player that's just riding your bench for half the season, returns, he's only getting you 4 to 6 targets, and you're like, wow, that was a complete waste of a pick, and I had to keep him. That's the worst part, is that you draft him, you put him on your bench, you're not dropping him in week 5, right? If you're just waiting for the suspension, you have another bench player that you can't really do anything with, and it's so valuable early in the season having that player, having that bench spot that you can rotate in and out. That's why we like to take, shots on high upside players late, because, okay, they don't work out. There's going to be multiple players you really want in free agency early in the season. Well, if Rice is riding your bench, you can't drop him. So it just creates a tough situation again. If he falls like the wide receiver, like 55 or so, I'm going to start to have interest. At 44, still not worth it, in my opinion. Final wide receiver go over today is Quentin Johnston. He just had a horrific rookie season. Basically a worst case scenario. And it kind of confirmed a lot of, red flags and a lot of things that like people were kind of pointing out for him as a prospect going into last season. Like, hey, he might not be that good. And it's crazy that he had such a favorable outcome of the season. And then that happened, right? All of Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Josh Palmer, all of them missed time. All of them missed significant time. And if you knew that going into the season, and I said the over-under is set at 4.5 half PPR points per game, you'd have taken the over, right? If I said over-under 1 game of 52 or more receiving yards, over under on 2 touchdowns. You'd have been like, over on all of those, obviously, right? No. So, and he played all 17 games. Like, it was just, he was so bad last year. And again, couldn't have played worse and confirmed a lot of people's concerns. That's the big part. It didn't come out of nowhere, right? There were concerns that he could only run deep. Kind of confirmed. Concerns that he doesn't high point the ball. He doesn't really adjust his body that well deep for a deep ball receiver, which is crazy. He has stone hands. Like, all of that kind of came true. And so year one just played out to the worst degree imaginable. And like, the fact that they couldn't even force him the football when they had absolutely no one else to throw to is not great. This season, it's like, yeah, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, they're gone, but they're going to be super run heavy. I can promise you, Ladd McConkey is a better wide receiver than Quentin Johnston already, probably significantly better. And so maybe he figures himself out this offseason, but in all likelihood, he will not. I don't see any ceiling here. If these late picks, now I really just want ceiling. I don't want someone who's probably going to return value, this late. We're this late in the draft. Like, I want someone where we're shooting for the moon. Pearsall, Wicks, Polk, Burton, Mims, Luke McCaffrey, Bateman, Douglas, Demarcus Robinson. Those are some players where it's like, I can at least see it. I can see something happening. I just don't see it. And many of them are going, 2, 3, 4 rounds after Quentin Johnston. I don't see it. I'm not drafting him this season. So if you watched this far, be sure to hit the like button. Tomorrow, we're going to go have a fun one. We're going to have 5 scorching hot takes for the 2024 season. So make sure to subscribe, click the bell icon so you don't miss that one. That, my friends, is in this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button and how about subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Thanks for watching.